From a thriving community to a dying land, evidence of historic Mill Creek Valley had all but been demolished before one of its final citizens decided to do something about it. Write their story. Commensurate with the title of her debut book, Vivian Gibson is among the last children of Mill Creek Valley. Told through the eyes of a child, the town comes to life to share the love, dimension, and color that glowed in spite of the industrial, impoverished backdrop. The hope that built businesses, churches, operated schools, and an established financial center became a described eyesore line item on a proposal that moved to displace and erase an entire community, all in the name of progress. Thanks to Vivian's research and reminiscences, we are given a gift from the past, from the people who made the most of their present. And now their existence can never be erased.
Well, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to be a part of our library's Black History Month celebration. I am Jade Harrell, and it brings me great joy to bring our author to you today, Ms. Vivian Gibson. We want to let you know about her new book, her amazing new book, The Last Children of Mill Creek Valley. And we have signed copies of your books available at our independent bookstore partner, Novel Neighbor. And if you want to be a novel neighbor, keep buying local, keep buying independent bookstores, and keep buying books. We are so excited to have you with us, Vivian. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to meet you and to do this interview.
Absolutely. It is my great pleasure. I heard today a quote, and I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but it was about history not being about the past, that history is living, breathing, and present. In fact, the I is in history is that it is still happening. So to hear about this wonderful place that was only 70 years ago, a mere generation away, that had deliberate efforts to be demolished and eliminated and to disappear, has now gotten new life with you, Vivian. So let's begin with a question that you inspired me with. What do you most want people to know about you?
You know, I've never been asked that question about me. That I'm just enjoying my life. I believe in having fun and being curious and being interested and learning new things. And at 71, I'm still curious.
Yes. So let's go into 70 years ago, circa 1959, rather, where we are in what's called Mill Creek Valley. This is right here in St. Louis. Yes. Baffling. I could look today and have no idea that it ever existed. So
that's part of what motivated me. Frankly, I pulled up to a stoplight, a red light at the intersection of Market and Jefferson one day, and I'm just sitting there waiting to make a left turn, and I realized where I was, and that was an intersection that was a part of my life, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing there to indicate that 20,000 people lived in this neighborhood, and that I walked across Market Street in Jefferson. I walked across Jefferson to go to kindergarten in first grade, and there was nothing there. And I started thinking about why and how could that be? And when I talked to people about Mill Creek, they would be exactly like you. What? I never heard of it. Where was it? Really? 20,000 people? Yeah. And so that's part of my motivation.
We are talking about a vibrant, thriving, densely populated area in metropolitan St. Louis that is but a trace. Right. Talk about the story that we're telling with The Last Children.
Well, I was actually one of the last children who played in that 450-acre area called Mill Creek Valley. It was in central downtown St. Louis, actually one of the oldest parts of St. Louis. Basically, all of the immigrants who came to St. Louis came there, lived in that area first, all the European immigrants for 100 years or more before the Great Migration of Blacks started populating that area. So I was one of the last children, but lots of children who were not Black were children in Mill Creek. It really was the oldest part of the city. And starting as early as probably the turn of the century, might be 1907, there had been discussions about how to revitalize that area. It was old and smoky, and people, as the city grew west and south and north, it became an eyesore. It was a place that was self-contained. Because it was segregated, our doctors, our lawyers, all of our teachers, our pastors, all of our churches, everything we did, everyone we knew in our lives were right there. And because it was a community, there were some houses that were grand and beautiful. And of course, there were professional people there who lived better than we did. We were poor. We had 8 children in our family. My grandmother owned the house. She lived upstairs in 4 rooms. We lived downstairs, 10 of us in 3 rooms. And there were times we even had roomers. And that's what we called boarders. Mm-hmm. We called them roomers. And so the story is about a family, a community, and how we lived, our lived experience, and what we did, how we loved, how we lived, how we learned. And that's what I'm most proud of, that you see the humanity of a group of people.
You said all sorts of immigrants came through that area. That's Why right. Then? How then were Blacks simply placed in a similar isolated part, and then that was equated with being an eyesore, industrial?
Yeah. Well, because it was the worst part of the city, so it was relegated to people who were moving away from the tyranny of the South, and but still the way our society was, and in a lot of ways still is, it was easy to just relegate people to a certain community and to give Black people the worst part of the community while they decided how to get rid of it.
You chose to tell this story through a child's eyes.
Yes.
Now, a child, and even you in this story, you don't hear about the eyesore or the lack of resources. It sounded like you had all you needed.
I wanted to tell the story from that perspective, what I saw in terms of, again, the humanity of that society. What it was like to be, first of all, I didn't know anything more as a child. So I wanted to just tell a straight story. I had to trust my reader to know what was going on in the backdrop, what was going on in the world, what was going on in St. Louis politically, racially. But I wanted to show how we existed, how we survived, how we coped, how we made a real life and a real community. And so I wanted to do it from that child's perspective. And that's what I knew. I mean, you're supposed to write what you know. Yeah. And that was what I knew, even though I had 8 sisters and brothers who were older than me. And sometimes when I would try to verify my memory, I would ask them sometimes, and what a 6 or a 7-year-old remembers of an incident or of circumstances, a 16-year-old sees it and remembers it differently. Sometimes I incorporated what how they remembered it because maybe it clarified something for me. But sometimes I still went with what I saw and how I understood it. And I wanted the innocence of that child to tell the story and not really muddy it with reality of the harsh reality of the world.
The research then, I wonder, did that come after the curiosity to share? Which came first, I guess, the research or the experience?
The stories came first. And I should tell you that I wrote those stories over a long, long period of time, years. Actually, what happened was that I retired and I was cleaning out my office in my second bedroom of years of papers, bags and boxes and file cabinets. I was clearing all those away. So I bought a paper shredder and I started shredding paper. And every once in a while I'd run across something I'd written years before. I think it's fair to say that I started writing these stories when my mother passed, when I realized how little I knew, how many questions went unasked. And so I started finding these stories and remembering, and there were several times throughout my life I tried to journal and it would last about 2 weeks. So I'd have those. Something would happen and I just wanted to remember it. So when it was all said and done after a few weeks, I had a real stack of writing, some essays, some paragraphs, some phrases, some on the backs of envelopes or napkins. And so I really wanted, now that I had time after retiring, I joined a writing group just to figure out how to compile it, but not for a book, really for my children, my nieces and nephews, and my grandchildren. So it started rather innocently that way. And because it was over that huge period of time, I had to figure out how to kind of weave them together. And that's how it happened.
I find it so interesting that, where you're missing the opportunity with your mom, we learn a great deal about your dad.
People ask a lot about my father in this book. And the interesting thing for me is that I was crazy about my mother. So I thought the book was going to be about her and how creative she was and how she taught us so much in her way of teaching, which was kind of hands off. It was kind of like, okay, go do it and we'll see.
Yeah.
And my dad worked sometimes 3 jobs and was rarely home. So you would think, you've heard that story so much where men are working and they're not there and they're not part of their children's lives. But somehow my father pulled us in. And a lot of what we learned in our relationship with him was centered around work. We worked hard and we knew that we had to pitch in and had to do these things. My father was a janitor at a church as his second job. And when your father is the janitor of the church, you are the janitor of the church.
Amen and amen.
That's right. Not only was he the janitor of the church, he was the music director.
That's right. Your father had musical talent.
Yeah. When my mother met him, he was a quartet singer. And handsome and dark with beautiful white teeth and dimples and a baritone voice. And so he worked a regular job at Public Service, which is the predecessor to Metro. It was the streetcar and bus company. And he worked on the streetcar lines. He repaired them and cleaned them, that sort of thing. So he had a regular job. He came home for about a half hour, ate in front of the TV while he watched the news, and then went to a second job. And so it was crucial that there was food ready when he walked in the door. Now, if you wanted to be in some trouble, if somehow mama didn't get home to cook that food, you walked in, you better start cooking. because he had a half hour to eat. And he was the janitor of the church, and then he would stop around 7 o'clock when the choirs came in for rehearsal and conduct rehearsals, and then finish cleaning up and close up the church, start all over again at 5 o'clock in the morning.
So I'm going to ask you to take us back to the neighborhood and help us understand what daily life was like in a densely populated, thriving Black community. I don't know that I can say I've ever seen that. I know you had to come up with your own fun. We didn't have the TVs and the video games, but help set the stage for the people.
I think not having TV, we did have radio, but I think not having TV and not having a lot of money to buy toys and that sort of thing just helped us be creative. We told stories, we sang, we danced, we built our own toys. We had to be out of the house all day long. First of all, there were only 3 rooms. You didn't want to be in the house anyway. There was no air conditioning, there was no furnace. We had a wood burning stove. We had to chop wood. And so it sounds like something out of Little House on the Prairie, but that was in the 1950s. My father was an only child to a woman who worked all day in white people's homes, taking care of their children, their laundry, their home. And so he had to take care of himself. He had to get up and work and chop wood and do all kinds of things before he walked to school. And then he came home and probably had to cook his own dinner and wash his own clothes because his mother was working. And they left Arkansas when he was 14 so that he could go to high school. They left the state because they had heard about Vashon High School that had been built a few years before, and there was no high school for Black children near his town. And so that's how they came to St. Louis. So my father was used to working. That's all he knew. I say in the book that he picked up Earl, Arkansas, and just plopped it right down in the middle of downtown St. Louis. And so we were raised like we were in Arkansas. We were running around barefoot. We were chopping wood. We had a garden, and it's all we knew. And I'm thankful for it because to this day, I think part of my resourcefulness, part of a lot of my attitude towards just getting things done and being curious about things and figuring things out comes from being raised that way. So we didn't complain about what we didn't have. We didn't know, again, we were segregated. So we didn't even know I didn't know that there was another world out there. When I found out that there were people who despised us, by that time, I was pretty strong. I was pretty much, I had good self-esteem. So it didn't matter. I sometimes worry and am sad about children today.
Yeah.
About how it must feel to know that you have to be afraid of the police. I mean, I can't even imagine that. And my parents protected us from that. They knew about it, but they protected us.
We are talking about Black History Month, and we just celebrated Dr. King's holiday and birthday.
Yeah.
Well, holiday for sure. And even he said that the churches were going to lead in the liberation of the community. In order to make the strides and the changes, the church was going to be central. I understand there were 40 churches operating in this area, and they were reduced down to one that no longer even bears its original name. As you look at it today, and along with Dr. King's, call and insistence, where do you think it could play a role today, or does at all?
Well, I think it's certain the Black church certainly still plays a role. I mean, it probably has diminished certainly with COVID. It has, but people have been resourceful. They're having church on parking lots and certainly on Zoom. And I think over time, it is not as strong as it was certainly when I was a child and how I grew up in the church. But it still has a role, and the role might be growing even more again, I hope. In terms of organizing Black people politically, it's unmatched. It absolutely is unmatched, along with sororities and fraternities. In my childhood, the church was so important, not only because my father worked there and we were responsible for keeping it clean. I mean, we had Christmas plays and speeches and Easter, and we went to Sunday school, and we learned the Bible and the books of the Bible, and all of our friends were there. So we had Sunday friends. So we had friends in the neighborhood, but you may have Sunday friends who lived on the other side of the church, who maybe went to a different school. So Sunday was a social time for us, but we were at church so long that we actually took our lunch to church. So if you were first there to open the church and clean it, then you went to Sunday school, then you went to regular service, and in regular service, we were the ushers and we sang in the choir. Then there were afternoon programs. There was what they call the BTU, the Baptist Training Union, that started at 6. So it was just part of our lives, and I enjoyed it. I think I worried about this book sometimes being too Pollyannish. I tried not to do that because I was a child and I was having all these adventures. I was really careful to make sure I told an accurate story about my parents' lives and what was going on with them, so it didn't seem like just a little girl having fun.
Sure. But what it did is it juxtaposed the fun with the reality or the present conditions.
Yes.
Your reality is what you created.
That's right.
And I really credit the adults that protected the children. It's a hard life for a child to live as an adult and deal with adult problems. And you didn't have a sense that you were even despised by another or larger community. When did you become aware? Because I look at children now, they have full access.
Yes.
To every single thing. There is no buffer or protection from what is going on around them. When did you become aware? And do you think, is there something that you would recommend for us with our children today? Keep them sheltered or have them know?
I don't know. It's a real hard thing. I tried not to shelter my children. But I don't think even with my children in the 80s and the 90s that it was as obvious as today. So it was different, but I certainly tried to expose my children to Black history in a way that I didn't. I mean, when I was in school, first of all, we couldn't even bring our books home. Our books were the secondhand books after white children had gotten new books, and many times they didn't have covers or pages were missing, and there weren't enough, so we couldn't even bring them home to do homework. And the only Black person in my history book I remember very clearly was George Washington Carver, and a drawing, a graphic of a slave in chains with a paragraph about slavery. You ask about when I found out. I think probably after we moved from Mill Creek to another neighborhood, and there were a few white people still in the neighborhood who quickly, after a few months, they disappeared. And I was starting to understand my parents' conversations about white flight and that sort of thing. So I started understanding a little bit.
You also have the book at a place called I See Me at
Yes.
the American Children's Bookstore.
Yes.
And it's called I See Me for the purpose of having books and literature that help people of color see other stories than the narrative that has been circling around them in a broader community. And your book is there. And it's come full circle. You mentioned you had to keep the books at school because you couldn't take them home.
Mhm.
As we're in this Black History Month celebration and closing this conversation, as well as what's really important about this story that you guys must read, what has come full circle for you as you look at the state of things today and where this plays a role?
Well, I think when you look at how everything is communicated so freely and clearly and instantaneously now, I think the connection I make to my book and my life is that I am telling this story, that it's a firsthand account, that if I had not written this book, there are not a lot of people who could even tell it. I was one of the younger children at 71. I have siblings in their 80s. A lot of the people who could tell this story are no longer here. And in 20 years, they won't be here. And if I had not written this book, that would be a real loss in terms of me telling a Black story as it was, so that you know who the people were. When I was doing research, I was hard pressed to find, I could only find 3 books that had more than a paragraph about Mill Creek. And so I think telling the story and being able to see our story on cell phones today, so immediately, our story is being told. And I think that's really, really big. I sometimes think about what happened with Martin Luther King and the voting rights and fire hoses and bull counter. The first time that was on television is when white people in the North realized that Black people weren't exaggerating their conditions. And now cell phones are doing the same thing. They're telling the story. White people are seeing for the first time that Black men can't breathe. And so I show that, as best I can, that I lived in this place that doesn't exist anymore, and here's our story.
That gives me chills. And it convicts me as well. So I want to take this opportunity to let your spirit bless other people. Had you not told the story, had you not sought out the research, we wouldn't have it in this way. What then is your call to the rest of us for what we are impassioned to do and called to do, and maybe even be a little intimidated or terrified to do because we've never done it? Or I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too this, whatever.
Well, you're certainly not too old. And I think everybody, I talked earlier about not really being able to write this as a young person, but you can write your truth. You can tell your story. You could enjoy your life. I really do believe the adage that if you do something you love, you won't work a day in your life. I think that's true. I don't spend a lot of time on anything that I don't enjoy. Sometimes you can't always get out of it, but I'm always trying to get out of it and trying to embrace what fulfills me. And I think more people should do that. Do what fulfills you. Life is short, very, very short. I just lost a brother last week. And I really believe that you should just go after whatever you think you want to do. And what's wrong with failing at it? You learn and fail, and we all know that. Just go after it. I really do believe that.
I can't thank you enough, Ms. Vivian.
Thank you
for this time and for what I'm sure is yet to be even more exciting things to come. I look forward to staying in touch.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad.
And I'd like that signed copy where you all can get yours as well. Just JADE will be enough on mine.
Okay.
But please visit Novel Neighbor. And we want to thank all of our partners, and most certainly the Black History Month celebration from our very special partners at the library. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jade. It was a pleasure.